Hello, this is David and welcome to Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, a review and history. The first thing that you'll notice when playing Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, other than the number 5 being dropped from its title, is that it looks, feels, and plays nothing like the previous games in the series. In fact, despite being on the PlayStation 2, the graphics are crap, and many fans have put the blame on this excessive departure from the prior installments as the reason for the death of the series. Gone are the gorgeous colors, deep, vivacious cultures, and the feeling of a living, interconnected world found in the previous games. Here, you're trapped underground in a post-apocalyptic hellhole. But enough about that. Let's start at the beginning. Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, henceforth to be called by me Breath of Fire 5, after all, the numeral 5 was kept in its Japanese title, was released in November of 2002 in Japan and sold 140,000 copies within 2 months. Later, the game was released in North America in February of 2003 and in Europe later that same year. The European version included some strange changes, such as the soft save function being removed entirely, so the only way to save your game is to use consumable save tokens. However, to compensate, the developers included roughly twice as many save tokens in the European version than in the other versions. Why change that? It's just weird. While the previous games all seem to take place in the same world and had many threads connecting each of them, Breath of Fire 5 takes place in its own dimension, wholly separate from all other games. Some fans speculate that it takes place some millennia after Breath of Fire 3, though. The theory goes that upon Miria's defeat, the planet began to wither and the Great Desert expanded. The people, suddenly unable to survive, had to burrow deep underground and rely on technology to eke out a living. It's a plausible theory, but not one supported by Capcom. The subterranean world is known as Shelter, and the Ryu we all know and love is back. This reincarnation is a ranger, low on the totem pole, tasked with protecting the shelter from monsters. During one of his missions, he meets up with Nina and the adventure truly begins. Don't get too excited though. Nina's mute, and she looks like a 5-year-old anorexic hobo. She's the impetus for the journey though. The polluted air of the underworld is killing her, and Ryu is determined to bring her to the surface in order for her to breathe freely. That's pretty much the story of the game in a nutshell. Everything is a huge departure, and the only inkling of the Breath of Fire essence that still remains are just a few names, like Ryu, Nina, Ranger, and Dragon transformations. That's about all there is to remind us that we are in fact playing a Breath of Fire game. Gone are the huge cast of characters. Here you only have 3 controllable members, so let's start with Ryu. Like Breath of Fire 2, Ryu is a ranger, but not a respected one. In this twisted world, everyone's social standing is determined at birth by their D ratio, and the higher the ratio, the better. Ryu's is extraordinarily low, only 1 out of 8,192. But as you play the game, there are ways to increase his ratio, which allows you to access different areas and see further scenes. As always, he can transform into a dragon, but it works very differently this time, and I'll get into that a bit later. Nina is your typical magic user, but she's not the hot, sexy, vivacious princess that we all know and love. Instead, the designers thought that it would be a good idea to have her be a rag-wearing, malnourished twig of a girl who can't speak. Continuing the theme started in Breath of Fire 2 of having a Warren clan party member in each game, Lyn joins as a member of an anti-governmental terrorist group called Trinity. She starts off as a bit of a bitch, but eventually opens up to Ryu and Nina. Breath of Fire 5 plays unlike anything else in the series. The developers have stated that the game's roguelike gameplay elements and high challenge were added to differentiate it from the previous entries in the series, which the creators felt were too easy, and the level of difficulty and deviation from the norm only increased as development continued. The end result is a kind of hybrid dungeon crawler meets real-time strategy game. For the first time in the series, battles aren't random, and enemies are visible before combat begins. You're now able to bait and trap foes before and during combat to give yourself a tactical edge. The combat system is actually really fun, and it is the heart and sole reason, in my opinion, to actually play the game. Let me explain. When a battle begins, you freely move your character about the playing field while it's their turn. Movement costs a certain amount of AP, however, as do the attacks that you use. Therefore, the more you have to move to get to an enemy, the more limited your attack options become. Once you've reached your opponent, you can continually use attacks in one long combo until you run out of AP, and then you're going to switch to the next character. Each of the 3 main playable characters has a set purpose. Ryu uses powerful melee attacks, Nina uses magic to attack multiple enemies or create powerful traps for foes to step into, and Lin can use her gun to repel, attract, or otherwise manipulate the position of your foes. Each battle is a unique puzzle to solve, so the constant combat never really gets old. Another controversial aspect of the game lies in the dragon counter system. Early in the game, after Ryu acquires his dragon powers, a counter appears that raises from 0 to 100%. As Ryu walks around, it slowly increases, and if, God forbid, he were to actually use his dragon powers, the counter would rise at an astronomical rate. And if it ever reaches 100%, the game ends and you have to start over from the beginning. This mechanic severely limits the amounts of times that you can actually use your powers and forces you to save them for only the most drastic of situations. However, in turn, the dragon powers are far more powerful than anything seen prior. Starting over isn't necessarily a bad thing though. The game was designed for it. In fact, the game rewards you for killing yourself over and over again. When you restart the game, you keep all of your skills and some of your experience. Since the battle skills are more important than your level, you can easily blast through early dungeons or just avoid most enemy encounters, so replaying doesn't take very long. Not only that, but when you replay the game, new story elements are interjected, mostly added cutscenes, expanding the game tenfold. After you beat the game, your D ratio is upgraded, so you can visit previously inaccessible areas. The game's built around replay value, which is good, because it's actually short for an RPG, which I greatly appreciate nowadays. Between the battle system, the genre switch, and the dark graphical change, it's no wonder why most players hate Breath of Fire 5. It's not traditional. In fact, it goes against just about everything the series stands for. Also, it seems that gamers these days want instant satisfaction, and if they have to look at a game over screen, they get frustrated and they quit. However, if you're able to look past this quirk, you'll actually find a very fun game. Dragon Quarter doesn't look terrible. I just don't like the style or locale. I prefer the bright, cheery graphics of Breath of Fire 2 and 3, not these drab brown and gray dark corridors. Everyone also looks like a Holocaust survivor, and the writers did a great job of fleshing out the bleak atmosphere. Musically, there's a lot of techno and industrial influence, which makes sense, and it does a wonderful job of amplifying the feeling of hopelessness and despair that the visuals already encapsulated so well. Quite a few features were cut from the final version of the game, including an online mode and a fishing minigame similar to early titles in the series. Various plot points that the development team deemed too shocking were also removed before the game was completed, including a locked room in the Biocore labs that contained decapitated duplicate bodies of Nina, and the scientist who performed Nina's operation at one point resembled Adolf Hitler. The creators stated that they originally wanted to include a cutscene in the game showing how the surface world became uninhabitable, but they were unable to do so. I will admit, when I first played Breath of Fire 5, I hated it with a passion and I put it down for years. But then I decided to give it a second chance about 10 years ago, and I'm glad I did because it really is a gem. The story, while dark and depressing, is captivating, and it's also pretty short and tight, and again, I can appreciate that now that I'm older. The battle system's also extremely fun once you get the hang of it. Don't be afraid of dying in the first few dungeons in order to start over a bit more powerful. Once you do that, the game becomes more forgiving, and you won't have to start over late in the game to redo tons of progress. It's hard to say where I would place Breath of Fire 5 against its predecessors, since it's just so different from the others. I do firmly believe that it would have done much better if it were just not a Breath of Fire game. It's just disappointing when you fully expect it to be something else. Played on its own merits without prior knowledge of the series, it's one of the best and most innovative RPGs on the PS2, but as a Breath of Fire game, it fails. Hard. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.